why the world is in such, I would say, dire straits right now. You'll gain a whole nother insight as to what is going on in the world economy. Let's just stay macro, keep it super simple.
This next moment, I think, sets the stage for everything that's going to happen in this country moving forward. It is incredibly crucial. What amounts to pretty darn close to 90% of human population that is undermining the dominance of the West and the Western hegemony, and to do it properly with commodity backing. I'll take you down a pathway that will help connect the dots, because I think it's important. There's a term in literature called the fallacy of composition, which you look at a whole bunch of individual pieces, and in and of themselves, they don't have the significance that they do when they're all put together. I started noticing really in 2017, and by 2019, I was convinced that I was onto something. And since then, I have followed this thread. And what's interesting is that the thread keeps accelerating really to where we are today, where it's becoming painfully obvious, as far as I'm concerned, that this is the direction things are going. So I'm going to take you down a path starting in 2017 and let yourself and your listeners decide for themselves if this is indeed correct, if I'm heading down the right path or not.
I think you nailed it so hard. What you're doing is you're putting the whole puzzle together.
I really noticed things starting to change in 2017, Robert. I noticed that out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank made a very big deal about repatriating their gold in 2017. Now, this was at the tail end of what had amounted to a 6-year bear market in precious metals. And in 2017 in particular, it was a rough year to own a precious metals company. You had Bitcoin really taking off. You had the equity markets doing fantastic. And gold was languishing, and central banks were selling it. It didn't make any sense to me. Why would the central banks be selling gold? I guess, well, maybe because it's been in the midst of a downdraft, and there's this new thing called Bitcoin that's really starting to take off. And maybe we were just moving away from the old way of doing things, and we're moving into a new reality. And capitulation came to mind. And in 2017, 6 out of every 10 orders that we did were people selling. Most of them aggravated that Bitcoin, which was supposedly cut from the same cloth as gold, was accentuating itself. And why wasn't gold? Out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank, who had attempted to start repatriating their gold a year or two earlier from the Federal Reserve in New York, finally made a big deal about it publicly. And they said, hey, send us back all of our gold. Now, it's important to understand that really, since the end of World War II, the United States held most of the world's gold. And the reason, in a nutshell, that we did was that at the end of World War II, at Bretton Woods, when the dollar was anointed the world reserve currency, we made a promise to the world saying, hey, you can give us your gold because it's safe over here. You've gone through 2 world wars and it's safe over here. And I'll tell you what, we'll pay you $35 an ounce for your gold. And in turn, you take the proceeds of that and you buy our US treasuries. And this will give you a return on a non-interest-bearing asset, and it will be held safely, and we will always sell it back to you for $35 an ounce. Now, it had been that way for a very long time, and as I get down this pathway, we'll get to that moment where that all changed. Germany says to the West, give us back our gold. And within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Turkey, Czech National Bank, Dutch National Bank, all of these banks followed suit, said the same thing, give us back our gold. And they said it not only to the New York Fed, but also to the Bank of England. We want to repatriate our gold. And this is really strange at this moment, because here we are in the midst of a downdraft in gold that is now going on 5-6 years, and the central banks are repatriating their gold.
This is 2017, so not that far away. Okay.
That's right, 2017. And now my interest is piqued. Hey, something's going on here. The central banks are increasing their gold holdings quietly and repatriating them even when gold isn't doing much. In 2018, the following year, you guys, those same groups that repatriated their gold bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years combined previously. So now something's really going on. These banks are repatriating their gold from the Fed and the Bank of England, and now they're buying copious amounts of it. Really interesting. In 2019, those numbers were up nearly 100% in terms of central bank purchases. It's really ramping up. Central banks not only have repatriated their gold, but now they're really buying it. And this is perplexing until mile marker number 1. Now, before I tell you mile marker number 1, I'd like people watching this to ask themselves, how much of this do I really know? And ask yourselves, is the media that is supposedly telling us the truth, really telling us what is important. Because I view some of the things I'm about to tell you as the most significant events, not only in my career, but ultimately in all of our lives. I think maybe you'll understand what I'm getting at. We'll start talking about these substantial, significant events that should really have been noticed by the public, but haven't. And I want people who are watching this to ask themselves, why? Why do I not know about this? Because they are very, very significant. Mile marker number 1, 2019, after the banks have just massively accumulated for the past 2.5 years and repatriated all of their gold, you have to wonder, were they clued into what I'm about to tell you? The Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank in Basel, Switzerland, in April of 2019, quietly reclassified gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset. Now, since 1944, at the end of the war, there had only been one Tier 1 asset recognized by the central banks, and that was US dollars and treasuries. It's a riskless asset. And now, out of nowhere, they levy gold from Tier 3, where only 50% was valued on the balance sheet, to Tier 1, where it's as good as cash or equal to cash. Very, very quietly. And it makes you wonder, were the other central banks clued in by the BIS that, hey, get your gold home and start accumulating it? I happen to believe the answer is yes to that question.
If I may add something, that was also the year the repo market crashed, September 17th, 2019.
And that's when people started waking up to what was going on.
And I'm going, what the heck is going on there?
Absolutely.
The repo market crashes. The last time that happened was 2008. So that's what I was watching.
Absolutely. Has been instrumental in a lot of my thinking, including calling where we are now Bretton Woods 3, which really fits in towards the end of what I'm going to talk about, a system dominated by commodities rather than by Western debt instruments. And that is where he says we are right now. He's the repo market expert. But yes, you can see my dad has this funny analogy for life. It's kind of like a roll of toilet paper. You don't notice it when it's spinning slowly, when it's a fresh roll, but over time it starts spinning faster and you become more cognizant of the cardboard underneath. Well, that's kind of what's happening to me here in 2020. The roll's starting to spin faster and I'm connecting these dots.
Wait, tell your dad I like his metaphor. It fits my mentality about a toilet paper roll. It does fit.
I will. So in 2020, we start to see some more things that I'm connecting the dots to, one of which is mile marker number 2. Again, ask yourselves, people, have you heard of this? And if not, ask yourselves, why? Am I watching the wrong stuff? Am I reading the wrong stuff? And I would answer, yes, you probably are if you haven't heard about this. Now, this, what I'm about to tell you about, started a few years before, but really started to gain steam in 2020. And I look at this as maybe the most significant event in most of our lives to this point. And that is the foundation of the Chinese Belt Road Rail Initiative. Most people I talk to have not a clue what that is. And it's incredibly impactful and incredibly significant on the West and the West's future, because what it is the most ambitious infrastructure project ever attempted in human history. It is connecting Asia and Africa, parts of Europe, and even parts of South America, the old Silk Road plus, through maritime channels, bridges, railways, roads, and this infrastructure program will only be patrolled by military and commerce. It is the Panama Canal on steroids, but what people need to understand is just this particular little infrastructure represents over 75% of human population and 45% of GDP before, global GDP, even before it's industrialized, and realize just how significant this really is. The contracts and the settlement on the new Belt Road is predominantly being settled in the new Chinese digital yuan. This is a very, very, very big deal because for the last 3 years, the digital yuan has successfully transacted upwards ends of $20 billion in trades and in settlements, even using it at the Winter Olympics. And I would like to call this a beta test. We'll get back to that as we progress, but really big deal where 75% of human population is beginning to be indoctrinated into a new currency, into a new settlement system. This ambitious infrastructure project is void of American participation and void of dollar settlement, almost exclusively and entirely.
This is like Marco Polo and the Silk Road. I mean, this is how significant this is what Marco Polo did. I guess he traveled from Italy all the way to China, and then he started connecting the dots. Well, the Belt and Road, or the project that the Chinese are undertaking using their CBDC, central bank digital currency, and asset-backed digital, is going to make 75% of the world population switch to Chinese.
That's right. And wait till I get to what's happened with it here when I get to 2022. It's more significant. You'll see when we get to 2022, it's becoming right in your face obvious if you are looking. So you're right. And this is a big deal. And this is the beginning of the infrastructure, the external and internal infrastructure that is, I think, laying a foundation for massive de-dollarization. But we'll get there in a moment. Further things start to happen in 2020 that really start to make me say, hey, I'm onto something here. No question about it. Now, out of nowhere, the International Monetary Fund, well, this is a group of nearly 200 countries that was established at Bretton Woods, says to the world, hey, we want a new Bretton Woods. What does that mean? That means that 200 countries from around the world want a new standard that isn't what the original Bretton Woods standard is, which is the US dollar is the world reserve currency. It said right on their website, we're requesting a new Bretton Woods moment, whatever the heck that means. But that really started to make me think, geez, this is bigger than even I had thought. When you have 200 countries from around the world on top of the Belt Road Initiative, on top of gold being reclassified tier 1, on top of all the central banks repatriating their gold, now the IMF wants a new standard. So now I'm convinced something's going on. And then it gets even a little bit deeper than that. Now, of course, in 2020, the central banks are still massively accumulating gold. I mean, copiously accumulating it, especially Russia and China and India and the members of the BRICS. The RICS and BRICS are the big ones, Russia, China, India, South Africa. But they're continuing to buy it. But then we see something on the COMEX market, the commodity exchange here in the United States, that came out of nowhere. And without getting too deep, let's just say that every week the COMEX market, the commodity exchange, publishes a report. And that report is called the Commitment of Traders report. And the Commitment of Traders report that I have been following my whole career shows the positioning, long or short, of the largest traders on the exchange. And typically, it's only been commercial banks, speculators, which are the hedge funds. And if one goes long, the other goes short, and vice versa. It's a zero-sum game, so to speak, where the managed money speculating hedge funds will go long, the commercial banks will go short, and vice versa. And that's all that was ever on the Commitment of Traders report until 2020. Out of nowhere, there is a new list of reportables on the Commitment of Traders called the Others. What the heck are the others? They're family offices and sovereign wealth funds. I would call them the most informed, well-funded private traders on the planet.
That is a major shift, and it goes to sovereign wealth funds, which is getting away from the big banks and all this.
100%. And most of the trading these folks would do was done on something called the Globex, which is, it gives them a little bit more privacy and anonymity. So no one really knows who the heck they are. But what they did in 2020 was now following part and parcel with what the central banks were doing. They were taking metal off of the exchanges. Now, at this point, it's turned into a casino for sure. But what happened in 2020 was this group, the Others, started to drain the market, the COMEX market of physical supply. When no one ever took possession, they took off in 1 year in 2020 more silver than we've seen in a typical decade being removed, and more gold that year than the Bank of Japan has in its official holdings. So now you have the most private, the most well-funded, well-informed private investors doing the exact same thing that the commercial banks and the central banks have been doing, and that is massively accumulating metal and taking possession of it. So here we are in 2020, and all of a sudden now, you see all of these things that are happening. The IMF asking for a new system, gold being reclassified tier 1, the central banks repatriating their gold. All of these things are happening. The banks copiously buying gold, and nobody knows about any of it. 2021 comes around and we see Russia and Turkey and India and Poland and China and Kazakhstan and Hungary and Thailand and Japan and Brazil and the Czech Republic and Turkey. They're all buying gold. No one's talking about it. Why? Because of its riskless elevated tier 1 status. You got half of the world's central banks copiously accumulating gold, and nobody is talking about it.
What Andy's saying, they're not just buying it, they're taking delivery of it. And that is a very, very, very big difference.
2021 comes around, and now I'm going to go back to what we talked about with the dollar being the world reserve currency. So the dollar was backed by gold as far as governments were concerned. We promise that any of the gold that we're holding for you, you can exchange your dollars, or even just the dollars that you own. You can exchange them for gold at a fixed rate of $35 whenever you want. Now we're going to get something a little closer towards the end of the Vietnam War. President de Gaulle from France realized that we were issuing more dollars and treasuries to fund the war than we had gold backing these promises. He sent warships filled with dollars to New York Harbor and said to President Nixon, we want our gold back for these dollars. And we gave it to him. And he bled down a very large portion of the gold held at the U.S. Treasury. At that moment, Nixon said, okay, August of 1971, that's it. The window's closed temporarily, although it's never opened back up. So it's been a long temporary. But we went back on our promise to the world. And it was at that moment that the dollar was backed by nothing. And so the question that I ask the people out there, and it's amazing how few people know the answer to this question, and is what has made the dollar the world reserve currency ever since? And you get a myriad of answers, usually centered around our military, or we have the biggest and most robust economy, or whatever. And I guess you could argue some of that is true. But what has made the dollar the world reserve currency was that 3 years later, Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia. And he made a promise to the Saudis. He said, how about this? We will back you. Let's call it a joint military cooperation agreement. And we will stand behind you. We'll provide you munitions and support. No one will ever mess with the Saudi kingdom. But for that, OPEC is going to value dollar or oil in dollars globally. Okay, they said, fine. And so since 1974, every single country on the planet has had to own dollars in order to buy oil. And it has created this synthetic demand for the dollar called the petrodollar and made the dollar the world reserve currency. If you want to power your country, you must own dollars. It is the protection of the Saudi kingdom and by default, the relationship with OPEC that has enabled the dollar to be the world reserve since 1974, because 3 years prior, the link to gold was severed. The dollar was at that point fiat, backed by nothing. And obviously, we all know the history. Since that point, the dollar has lost over 90% of its value. But that's for a discussion for a different day.
And that's why savers are losers. Why would you save dollars when inflation's running at about 16%? They reported it at 8%, but it's really at 16%. So you're going negative 16 on your money? Why would you save dollars? But these idiots, oh, you got to save money, get out of debt. I'm going, wait a minute. The dollar is created via debt. Don't you get that? And the only way they pay it back is via your taxes. Idiot, can't you get that? What happened in 1974 was ERISA was passed. ERISA's Income Retirement Securities Exchange, something like 401k, IRAs. Also in 1974, the gold became legal for Americans to own. So 74 was a very big year. So I had all this gold I was smuggling in from Hong Kong. I could now own it legally. And then, exactly as I said, Kissinger promises the Saudis will protect you as long as everybody in the world must buy oil in dollars. So it became the petrodollar, no longer a gold-backed dollar.
100%. Exactly. And then comes mile marker number 3. And no one knows this. And
I know.
It just absolutely baffles me that nobody knows this one. And I would say this marker is way more significant probably than the 2 preceding. And the fact that our media doesn't say anything about it, I find it to be deplorable. And there is no fair and balance. We're being fed the wrong information, because this next moment, I think, sets the stage for everything that's going to happen in this country moving forward. And that is what happened the day that we left Afghanistan. Now, what happened when we left Afghanistan, to me as an American patriot, and I am a patriot, and I love this country, and I feel blessed to be here and for the opportunities this country has afforded me and my family. We are the American dream. But I will tell you that as an American patriot, I was embarrassed to almost call myself an American the day we left Afghanistan. Leaving behind enemy lines, something we never would have done in the country I grew up in. You would never leave servicemen and women behind enemy lines. You would never leave the people who trusted you with their lives, the freedom fighters, behind enemy lines and give their biometrics to the Taliban. And I think there is no coincidence to the announcement of this mile marker number 3, because we embarrassed ourselves on a massive scale with people hanging from a transport plane as the last plane out of Afghanistan is going, knowing we have Americans that are still there today. It's inexcusable and it's deplorable. And I think it, in many ways, changed the way the world looks at the United States, or at least our leadership. And there's no coincidence to the timing of this massive announcement. Now, once again, what makes the dollar world reserve? Oh, yeah, it's the protection of the Saudi kingdom. What happened the day after we left Afghanistan? Russia and Saudi Arabia announced a joint military cooperation agreement. What? Are you kidding me? Russia is now protecting Saudi Arabia? And the day after that, guess who did it again? Nigeria makes the same announcement that Nigeria and Russia are now protecting through a joint military cooperation agreement. They're maybe the fifth or sixth largest OPEC producing country, and we know what Saudi Arabia is. Subsequently, we've already seen that Nigeria is selling their oil to China right now for yuan-denominated bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It's called the Petro Yuan Bond. And because it is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, this is how countries like Iran sidestep our sanctions. They'll sell their oil to the Chinese in a Petro Yuan bond, and they can immediately convert it to gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange into kilo bars and take possession of it. This is why the Shanghai Gold Exchange has delivered close to 100 times more gold than we have, because these countries are doing just that. And guess who else is doing it? Saudi Arabia. So you have the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, the Saudis, and now Nigeria, two of the 13 OPEC member countries, selling their oil already to China, both being protected by Russia. Nigeria, part of the Belt Road Initiative, being protected by China. They're selling their oil in something other than dollars. This is a huge deal. Of course, we're not talking about it, but it is a massive deal.
Holy mackerel.
As we go through where we are now in 2022 and we get to Klaus Schwab, I'm going to try to put the pieces together and let you make up your minds for yourself. A lot of these pieces, I think, have been in play for a very long time, evidently. And even when you talk about some of the things that you saw, they take a long time to play out. But I do think as we see what's happening here in 2022, it is speeding up. So the mile marker number 4, it's one that I think has incentivized the speeding up, if you will, of this progression of events. And I'm going to lay out several of them that have happened here this year alone. But as the world reserve currency, if you weaponize it the way we did against Russia, you are asking for trouble. And I think the question that I pose to people, was it intended or was it unintended? What I mean by that are the consequences intended or unintended. Why do I say that? I say that because our Fed chairman, Powell, I believe has no intention of being written about in history books as blowing up the American dream. Because in the last 3 years, more money has been created in the last 3 years than in the entire history of the country before. The majority of that money went into assets where hedge funds can borrow $1 billion at 1%, plow it into equities, plow it into real estate, plow it into cryptocurrencies, make a fortune, pay off the loan with no problem at all, make huge bonuses. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is a massive distortion in asset prices. You could call this the crack-up boom in Austrian economics, where massive expansion in credit and lowered interest rates create distortions and misallocations of capital and resources where price discovery is next to impossible. Houses are doubling or tripling in a year. Equity portfolios the same. Cryptocurrencies up 10 times. And you know that's not how markets work. They don't go parabolic like this. And I think a lot of it has to do with the distortions and the misallocations that were created through massive money printing. So I want you to think of what Klaus Schwab said in 2019, that there'll be a great reset, that you'll own nothing, and you'll be happy to rent. Now, when he said that, I thought he was an idiot. But when we get to the end of what I'm talking about here in 2022, we're going to reflect upon that. So if you push the Russians out of SWIFT, if you sanction them, if you freeze their assets here in the States, you have every other country in this group of BRICS saying, are we next? Is it coming for us next? You think there's any coincidence that China has sold well over 100 billion in treasuries over the last 7 months? They have their eyes set on Taiwan. I think we pushed the Russians right into the open arms of the Chinese and their CIPS system, the cross-interbank payment system. That is what the SWIFT is. It mirrors the SWIFT. It is their answer to the SWIFT. We pushed them right into the open arms of this coalesced group. Imagine that the United States is Russia and that Mexico is the Ukraine. And we're in a war with the Ukraine. And Russia freezes us out of SWIFT, sanctions us, takes all of our assets, gives $90 billion to Mexico, provides them with Stinger missiles and drones and the intelligence of where to drop the bombs. Is that not a declaration of war? Sure as hell seems like it to me. But if you don't think that this is going to have profound impact globally, then you're a flippin' moron. And I want to say, in the back of my mind, I can't help but shake that this was an intended exercise on creating a villain and maybe getting this great reset that we're talking about. So let me just take it a little further. Let's look at what's happened as the toilet paper roll is spinning now. What's happened so far in 2022? It'll blow you away. First of all, Nigeria and Saudi Arabia are selling their oil to China for the yuan-denominated petro-yuan. You have the Russian-Iran-India corridor that just came out. This is linking Northwest Russia to the Persian Gulf via the Caspian Sea and Iran. Everyone else has to go all the way around, but the countries who are in the group get to cut through. You have Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia announce that they are contemplating joining the BRICS nations. Now, if you say publicly you're contemplating, it's a done deal. These countries are moving away from the Western alliances and they are joining the BRICS. So you had Turkey come out and say they want to ditch the dollar for payments in Russian energy. And they've purchased 75 tons more gold in the first 7 months of the year than any central bank on the planet. They are the largest accumulators of gold. Turkey.
We were warned of this years and years and years ago. You know, that's like Orwell said, if you can't win the argument, change the story. And that's what Biden is doing. He's just changing the story. We're getting our asses handed to us. The toilet paper roll is showing, and people are still wondering, well, should I just buy more real estate? Should I buy more gold? Should I buy more? Well, you better find out your own answers pretty quickly.
How does this all blow up? Simple. Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS nations. Every OPEC producing country, all 13 of them are on the Belt Road. They all sit on a stage with their arms around each other on a Sunday night here in the States, Monday morning, somewhere in China or in Russia or wherever this meeting is. And Saudi Arabia says, hey, US, thank you. It's been a hell of a ride. We appreciate it. As you know, we are being now protected by China and Russia. In fact, we struck a joint military cooperation agreement the day you idiots pulled out of Afghanistan the way you did. And we realized that maybe you weren't the best partners to tie our wagon to. You know, you sent over President Biden to beg for oil. He didn't beg for oil. He hasn't even gone to Mexico or the Texas-Mexico border. He came and asked us to not join the BRICS nations. But we've decided after contemplation that, hey, you know what? It's in our best interest, and all of OPEC, who is on the Belt Road, that we're going to open up energy purchases in other currencies, including the yuan, the rupee, the ruble, maybe euro, gold, and dollars. Like that, it's over. Because what happens? Every country on the planet who has had to own dollars since 1974 dumps them. And if you ever saw the moving trading places where one Duke brother says to the other Duke brother, sell, Mortimer, sell, because everyone will start dumping dollars. As the dollar collapses, that's pillar number one. The dollar value collapses. What happens when those dollars collapse and hit the U.S. shores? Hyperinflation. What happens as an adverse reaction of hyperinflation? Interest rates spike. You have to have higher interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. There's your villain, and this is your great reset. This is how fragile the system truly is, and this is why you own precious metals. It is not to get rich, it's because we are on the cusp, I believe, of a change.
This is why the biggest stock market crash in history is still coming. It's now here, and it followed 2008. And I knew they hadn't fixed the problem, they made it worse.